Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're gonna be reviewing Lady of Shalott by the band Atmosphera.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
I've got a lot to say about this album, so without further ado, here are some of my favorite bits from this album. So today's album comes from one of the most obscure subgenres of prog, being the Israeli prog scene, and not only the Israeli prog scene, but the Israeli prog scene in the 70s, of which there aren't many bands and albums in general. Overall, the progressive scene has hit Israel in a very late period of time, so while the rest of the world were enjoying their Genesis, Pink Floyd and Jethro Tulls in the early 70s, it has taken until 1975 for actual progressive bands to start forming in Israel. And today's album is just one of those glimpses into the past. It was recorded and written between 1975 to 1977 and released in 2002. Wait, no, that doesn't make any sense. It was recorded in 1977 but released in 2002? Maybe they meant the remastered version of it? I don't know, how does it make sense that an album recorded in 1977 was released in 2002? Well, in order to understand that, we have to look a bit into the history of this group. So in 1975, only being 16 years old, three friends from school gathered together to try and create their own band, creating their own type of music which they really loved, which was progressive rock. So the three teenagers brought along some more of their school friends to help them create this band, and they started off by writing and recording the two songs which are now known as the side B for this album, being Tomorrow and Love Is Waiting for a Lover. But when it came to really expressing their musical creativity, they actually wanted to create something grander, something bigger, something much more impressive that would go ahead and show their prowess, and it was the idea of keyboardist Yuval Rivlin, who chose a poem by Alfred Lord called Lady of Shalott, on which this entire first track and title track was based. But this band of youngsters didn't really have a smooth sailing, and unfortunately member changes were an often thing with them. They always seemed to have to replace another band member, and as it happened, they reached a point in which they didn't have a vocalist. But some of you on the show might remember episode 53, on which we looked at an album called Peace by an Israeli band called Zingale. Now, they were active around the same time as this band, and Zingale themselves were supposed to sign with the Decca record label, which would have turned them into an international band, but unfortunately due to Decca's CEO passing in 1977, that thing didn't really work out and the band disbanded. So singer for Zingale, Ephraim Barak, actually stumbled upon members of Atmosphera in a record shop, and they started talking about their music, and one thing led to another, and so Ephraim Barak, who was 27 at the time, found himself performing with a bunch of 18-year-olds. But I'll give him that, they were some really talented 18-year-olds. And the inclusion of Ephraim Barak in this lineup for the band was so great, and his voice on this album is truly fantastic. So with finally having a sustainable lineup of members in the band, they started recording this album, making decent pace out of it. But the thing is, the prog scene in Israel didn't really last long and stayed pretty much underground for most of its runtime, and at the time they were recording this album in the late 70s, a newer genre of music started emerging, now known as punk, which started being the most popular thing among many. Thus, there was pressure on them to release this album due to the ever-decreasing decline in interest in progressive music. Now combine that with the fact that most of the band members at the time were just about to enlist the army, as it is mandatory in Israel, and that led basically to a rushed mixing which wasn't complete, and unfortunately the album was shelved all the way up until 2002. And it really took the efforts of some really talented and motivated people to take these recordings from the past, remix them, work on them, and then release them in fabulous CD form. Now, I know some of the people who were in charge of remixing and redistributing this album, and they really did a great job on it, and one of the things that I really liked is the booklet found on the CD, and that booklet and what's written on it really helped me in researching for this video. But how's this album by itself? Well, unless you're legally deaf, you would probably right away understand what's the mainstream band that really influenced the creation of this album. All the way from the thick bass grooves to the higher than usual and just slightly strained tones of Ephraim Barak, you really can't miss the fact that Atmosphera were going for the signature yes sound. And they actually do a pretty good job at it. The first track, the title track itself, actually starts off with what sounds like outtakes from Fragile and then moves on to a more improvisational part, basically taken out of Tales from Topographic Oceans. And I know a lot of people whining about bands that try and copy their heroes and create music like theirs, but honestly, is there really anything such as originality? Can you truly create something of your own? Everyone has their own influences, and I personally believe that if you make good music and it sounds good, no matter who's it's inspired by, I think it's really good that they actually created something worth listening to. And hey, let's not beat over the bush and act like Marillion weren't some Genesis copycats at the start. Now, one thing that's really apparent on this album in particular is the overall disorganization. Firstly, the songs were written in very different times in their adolescent years. Now, it wouldn't really matter if they had this 2-year gap between writing the songs, but the thing is, you change so much in these ages. They were basically 16 when they started and 18 when they finished off, and you change so much, and thus the B-sides for this album don't really sound anything like the A-side. And the rushed mixing for this album and the eventual remixing of it really does linger with some major flaws, which make it really hard to listen to cohesively, which make it quite hard to listen to and just enjoy it for the quality that's pretty much lacking on it. And the disorganization of this album also features with the incohesive nature of the songs. Basically, from the second track on this album all the way to the end, we do get less of that yes signature sound and more of a just improvisational sound, which really doesn't linger on more than just progressive rock in its essence. Now, while I still had plenty appreciation for this album in its A-side, the B-side is where things really went downhill for me. The sound on the B-side started being less and less cohesive and a lot more improvisational, and nothing really stuck with me all that well. And despite all of the band members basically being very talented and somewhat virtuosos, I still believe that there's a lot of potential within this album, but there really isn't a lot of potential being fulfilled on it. And unfortunately, this band didn't go on to create more things, but I think that they had the perfect groundworks to create something bigger, but unfortunately that just didn't work out and we're left with this album alone. I guess at the end of the day we should just be grateful that we even got to listen to this album, and even if it came in a 30-year late runtime, I still think that it's quite a pleasure that we have it. This realistic cover is pretty nice, and it somewhat feels like a Roger Dean work despite not having his signature art style. And much like this band trying to copy Yes in some ways, so does the band logo. Much like Grobschnitt had done or Kyrie Eilison, so does Atmosphera go for that very signature Yes band logo. The one thing I actually do kind of like about this cover are the colors being used. I really like the tone of light blue that is paired with the sort of yellowish beige tone, and of course the very stark contrast in most of the cover. I think it's pretty cool, but overall I don't really have a lot to say about this cover. I think it's not really that impressive, but it definitely has that progressive rock album feeling to it. So this album, although a lot of people basically framing it for trying to copy Yes, I think has a lot of its own to stand on its 2 feet. And in my personal opinion, it has a ton of potential, it isn't bad to listen to at all, and it's definitely quite enjoyable, so it's getting a very proper rating of 8 out of 10. But that's about it guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to Arbeit macht frei by the band Area. I of course want to thank my lovely supporter over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Walnum, you are the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it guys, have a wonderful day and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye guys.